time when it happens, but hopefully not.
You're alive.
There's a bunch of us here from the aquarium, so hopefully I will get interrupted periodically. Shane is my coworker. We kind of do all this stuff together. Ashley's a volunteer. Terry's a volunteer. Eric Moore back there somewhere is also a volunteer. So I'm going to talk, and Shane and I are going to talk about kind of what's happened during the pandemic. And then when we're talking about the actual volunteer program for folks that might be interested in that, we'll get some more involvement with people that are doing what you would be doing as well. I'm Joe.
Hi, Joe.
Hi, everybody. Happy whatever this is. Thursday. I just went to the eye doctor, which I've never done before, and they put those drops in my eyes. And I've spent the last 2 hours wandering around Manhattan, sort of unsure who's a hostile force. Manhattan already feels kind of hostile to me, so this made it even more intimidating. But I'm better now. I can actually see faces again and so forth. That's where we work. Show of hands, how many folks have been there? Okay. If you haven't been there, it's not that far. I live out there too. It's in Coney Island, which if you get on a number of trains in Times Square, it will actually take you right there. And you can get off the train and go to the aquarium. We would love your business right now because we're hurting. We're always kind of hurting for a nonprofit, but it definitely has not gotten any better during the last 18 months. Does that switcher work, you think? Should I try it?
Try it. Next.
No.
Which button do I push?
You push the lower right-hand arrow that points to the right. Probably. Maybe. I love technology. Oh. There we go. Look, that's Shane and I. So under normal circumstances, this is our job, is we basically make this pump work all the time. That pump is what vacuums out all the algae that grows in our outdoor sea cliffs exhibits. And it used to break all the time. But now under our new regime, we have 3 of them that are identical. And when one breaks, we just take it away and put a new one in there. And that's basically what we do, usually. And the help that we have with that is about 100 folks that come every 2 weeks on the volunteer dive team. Aquariums nationally tend to depend on volunteer divers to do a lot of their underwater work, both in terms of education, sometimes feeding animals, and of course, the thing that gets the bulk of the work is actually just scrubbing and cleaning things. We are fancy janitors. Because people want to go diving all the time, they rely on volunteers. And so we have this amazing community. And surprisingly to me, when I came to work at the New York Aquarium 4 years ago, I expected that the most exciting part would be the animals. I actually kind of love the people more. I know we're all animals too, but it's a really nice group of people. Which button is it?
This one to go forward.
That one to go forward. It's a really nice group of people, and it's unique within the diving community in that there's rich folks, there's poor folks, there's about half women at this point. There's a bunch of LGBTQ plus folks. There's folks from immigrant backgrounds and folks from pure WASP Oregon backgrounds like me, like all sorts of different folks coming together because we like animals. I work with police officers. I'm a longtime lefty, and it's been really weird for me to get to know the cops and be like, this guy's all right. And they like sea turtles just as much as I do. And this is like what we do, Shane and I usually, is that we help organize this stuff. And it's a beautiful opportunity for people to get to go diving year round. Like, I think that's really the thing that comes together for people. But it's also a nice little piece of community in New York. I feel like, I think it was Mark Twain that said he's never been surrounded by so many people but felt so all alone as in New York City. And a number of us that come here, I think, feel that a little bit. And this is one of those places where people actually make connections and build community. Talk about that more in a minute. Not to embarrass you or anything.
Maybe not. Point at the screen.
Yeah.
All right, so this was spring 2019. One more. Oh, that's sad. And the sad and beautiful thing is that, like, I don't know if you all had this experience during the lead up to the pandemic, but we were going full steam, like up through early March. But we were teaching CPR classes. We were all breathing into the same dummies. We were doing all this diving and stuff together. And then, like, literally, I think Thursday night before one of your shifts on Friday, I got the call, like, no more diving, no more volunteers, nothing. So I think that Thursday, right after I finished scheduling the week with this, like, ambitious schedule of all these different people coming in, we were like, oh, yeah, I guess we do need to stop that now. But there was that kind of, like, long, prolonged denial that was what's going to happen.
I came in on Friday to go home for indefinitely.
And then this happened. And it was, I think that every aquarium in the country did this. And I think we did it partially to put it on social media because it was a way of interacting with our audience and our potential customers, not to use too much of the filthy lucre involved in it, but that is part of it. But also partially because we were all freaked out too. And it was neat. It was neat to be able to go put a penguin in the fish hall and have them walk around and see what they look like. And I think that some of our animals actually kind of were confused by what was going on. I mean, he always kind of looks like that anyway. But like the sea lions that do the shows for the audience and stuff, like some of them have to be trained to do that. And some of them, especially the ones that have grown up in captivity, which is the majority at this point, like it is part of their routine. And they, to some extent, not to anthropomorphize, but they enjoy that interaction and they enjoy that approval that they get from it. And so not having that approval, like you actually saw the animals acting a little differently. And then other animals didn't care. I don't think the sharks even noticed. But this is kind of around when things started getting weird on the staffing side of things. Shane, do you want to talk about what happened after we kind of broke apart into those two groups?
Yeah, we broke.
Come on up here.
Okay.
Come on.
We broke into two groups. We split the staff into an A and a B team. Joe and I were not on the same team for obvious reasons. And even outside of work, the teams didn't really meet up or anything at all. And I went from working on dive gear and planning dives to learning how to be a keeper. And specifically in this case, I think after a while, a fish keeper really fast. I don't know a lot about water quality or chemistry or anything. And it was strange to go into work. But at the same time, it was a lot of fun to learn how to, what the keepers do. I had a good time. It was.
What did you do? What were the highlights?
At first, I worked with the mammal team, and the highlights were cleaning the otter's pen from a different perspective. As opposed to underwater, I cleaned the bat pens. I mean, it was just stuff that needed to be done. I fed the penguins, and I helped hospital do the workup. Well, I helped the keepers and the hospital do the workups on some of the penguins and some of the sea lions. We had a sea lion or two born during the pandemic, and those require a fair amount of care to just sit and, I mean, it's basically observations. You just sit and watch them for, hours on end. And I think towards the second half, the fish team on my team needed help. So specifically in the spineless building. So I learned very quickly how to help take care of and maintain water quality systems and feeding routines, and how to take care of cuttlefish and jellyfish and grow cuttlefish, I suppose, and jellyfish. We breed them. Both animals are, ourselves. Getting off track. That's mostly of what I did. I did no diving.
Did you feed that octopus and tunnel?
No, but I fed the one in spineless building.
I ended up, everybody on the fish team in my group, I was on team A or whatever, the whole fish team got COVID. So I think me and one other person ended up taking care of all the fish and invertebrates. And the octopus, I could not figure out how to feed. It kept getting it. And it would turn into this thing where every time I went to feed the octopus, I could feel my heart pounding. So I figured it out.
Yeah.
It was kind of a neat time on some level because Christine and I, we got to do all this stuff that we didn't usually get to do, and got to learn a lot of skills that usually we're off in our little dive world doing dive stuff. But we suddenly got to like learn how to feed all these animals and feed cuttlefish and take care of all these things.
Mhm.
I mean,
I think the day started earlier too.
they started earlier.
Mhm.
Which
Which
was
was
like the week went on a little longer.
yeah. They
We were doing 7 on, 7 off.
we were, and it's
As I imagine many folks that were still doing essential work.
they work hard. They work very hard. Oh.
You're looking at. You can keep going, I think.
Next one.
This is our dummy Lloyd. He usually participates in dive drills. Usually we do extraction drills in the spring, but people started breaking into the aquarium around end of April, beginning of May. I think number one, because they were bored, and number two, because they were trying to get pharmaceutical drugs out of the vet offices. Maybe I shouldn't actually put that on YouTube. Happily, there weren't any in there, and the ones that were there were so completely secure they weren't able to get any of it. But people kept breaking in, and so we temporarily stationed our dive dummy outside in a security outfit in the golf cart. And he spent about a month and a half of the pandemic out there helping with the security test.
He now sits in the back of the sea cliffs and scares the daylights out of me every time I walk by him.
No, he moved again.
Oh my god.
He's now part of the final exam. He's in the
Terrible.
compressor.
And we had a naming contest for him when he was.
His name is Lloyd.
His name is Lloyd, but they didn't know that. We were the only
We tried to rename him.
Yeah.
It didn't work though.
It's not right. We also get to just kind of look at all this stuff that we don't always get to look at. We were busy, but we also had our routines were different. And so, as I imagine many of us were, instead of going home where things were often very quiet, or in my case, my wife was still busy dealing with teaching kids online, which is so much more unpleasant than teaching kids in person, which is actually fun. But so I would stay after work sometimes and just look at stuff. And one of the things that I hadn't gotten a chance to observe is that the sea otters, at night, they take the little pieces of artificial kelp, which are felt, and they wrap themselves in them. And it's really cute. And for the first session of photos, Jacob, our older sea otter, would wrap himself in the kelp. And then eventually the younger sea otter, Quint, took the kelp away from him and started wrapping himself in it instead. And that's the kind of thing I would never have noticed if the pandemic wasn't going on. So I'm actually kind of grateful for some of those moments we had to observe a little bit. We also got to take a closer look at catastrophic molting, which is a seasonal thing that penguins go through, where they basically once a year just start looking like total crap. And if you come into the aquarium and see the penguins and you're like, wow, it looks like they have some sort of horrible disease, it's probably catastrophic molting. Please do let us know, just in case. Like if it's some sort of actual behavioral issue, we want to know about it. But if they're looking like this, all patchy and gross, it's because they're in the process of growing a new coat. And a couple of these guys, this is a juvenile verging on adolescent penguin. And part of what happens, you can see he doesn't have the same sharp markings as the other ones, as he's starting to shed that juvenile coat. And when it grows back, it's going to sharpen up. And then this year, when it's growing back, it's going to be even sharper. And in other ways, life went on as well. Oh wait, no, I'm doing my transition wrong. This is what happened without the divers. So the volunteers come in and keep the glass clean, and the glass did not stay clean very long. That was probably April. That's cyanobacteria growing on the sand. None of this stuff caused animal health issues. The water quality parameters stayed safe for the animals that were in there. But from an aesthetic perspective, and I think, Shane, I'm sure you had this experience walking by that, it was definitely like, oh my God.
Yeah. I'd never seen it like that.
You have to someday get rid of that.
Uh-huh.
So you were missed, not just for your faces and stuff, but also because it got ugly. And then I think we all had this experience that life went on in different ways. People had babies. These are different volunteer babies that happened. And we had these were right around the time of the pandemic, but we had 2 different aquarium-born romances that came to fruition during the pandemic. Current volunteer Liz and former volunteer Neil got married. And 2 other volunteers who will remain anonymous for the moment got engaged. This is right before the pandemic, technically, but it still, we kind of all found out about it right as the pandemic was happening. So it's kind of beautiful to be able to communicate with people and keep that little piece of community going, that it wasn't just sad stuff of people being worried and people losing their jobs and all that bad stuff that happened, but also that our lives were going on, that we did have community. And it was nice to see these moments of joy happening with people too. And it wasn't just the volunteers. There's also the animals. So we had baby penguins. The pandemic happened in the spring. That's when the peak was, and that's when babies have come out of the animals. We had a baby harbor seal. We had a baby sea lion. So we had, in the midst of all this other stuff going on, these challenges with staffing, suddenly people had to figure out how to keep these animals fed and taken care of, which was both rewarding and also logistically challenging. And then around about end of June, beginning of July, we got permission to bring volunteers back. And for anybody that has sort of dealt with this, the pandemic transition on an administrative level, the liability aspects of this have been really kind of overwhelming. And I'm sort of in a mid-level of the aquarium, and there's a lot of folks way above me at the Bronx. We're part of Wildlife Conservation Society, which is headquartered at the Bronx Zoo. There's a lot of folks there, and they were like, wow, they're going to be scuba diving all together in big groups during the pandemic. That is something we really don't want them to do. So it was slow to get the permission for it, but they also realized that it was a very unique situation within the WCS parks and that the volunteers were needed. So the dive volunteers came back before volunteers at any of the other parks, specifically because the work that you do is unique and is so vital. And at this point, the filtration systems and other stuff that can get clogged by algae was starting to have problems. So we needed to dive, and we didn't have enough staff. There's that chronically underfunded nonprofit aspect of it. We didn't have enough staff to put together enough dives to really keep up at all with the algae growth as we were going into summer. So we needed the volunteers back. And we did a bunch of stuff to mitigate the COVID risks. There wasn't a vaccine at that point, but we've been wearing a lot of masks. And we are still wearing masks constantly at the aquarium on grounds. If you don't like wearing masks, probably not a great volunteer gig for you. Actually, there's very liberating to be speaking to people indoors. It feels a little bit like I'm being naughty. But when we were at the aquarium, Shane and I are wearing masks all day long unless we're sitting away from other folks at our desks. As soon as we went diving, kind of realized there's all these muscle memory things, and I'm not sure if you all thought about this, but that act of spitting into your mask. First time I did that, I was like, oh, I can't do that anymore now for the next umpteen months. So now we've got baby shampoo and all our clipboards. We're doing all that stuff. Same thing when you turn your kid off in an indoor space and then purge your regulator, whatever mucus and spit was in there is suddenly aerosolized in an indoor area. So we've had to think about stuff like that and like, oh, okay, we're going to turn our kid off and then maybe we'll press the octo, or maybe we'll inflate our BCV inflator as an alternative way of depressurizing the system. So getting 100 of us all on that same page of thinking about all these little muscle memory things that many of us have been doing for decades at this point, just sort of instinctively trying to unlearn, not all of it, but just those little steps along the way. It's been really challenging. Not just to teach people, but to learn from me too.
Mm-hmm. And you learn as you go along, but you think you have not everything, but inevitably you're sitting there going like, oh, there's another one we gotta look at.
Yeah, just kept going.
Mm-hmm.
And this is, I think, the first day that we actually had volunteers come back.
Mm-hmm.
And you can see that they haven't been here and they have been here. And that's the sort of amazing difference that just having the volunteers back sort of made for us. And there weren't visitors yet at the aquarium at this point, but in terms of being able to observe the animals and make sure that they're healthy, just being able to see them is vital. And it was getting to the point where we were actually having trouble seeing them because the volunteers have been gone and we missed you so darn much. And that brings us to the dive team. Eric, where are you at? Come on up here. We can kind of tag team this part of things.
Yeah, right.
Eric, how long have you been a volunteer?
About 6 years. 6 glorious years.
As I mentioned, New York Aquarium is part of the Wildlife Conservation Society, which runs the Bronx Zoo, runs the Prospect Park Zoo, Central Park Zoo, Queens Zoo, not the Staten Island Zoo, and also has about 4,000 employees overseas that run field stations and national parks primarily. We do not just the public education part of things, but also lobbying internationally. We were really involved in the COP conference that just happened. Hopefully the good part of it, not the disappointing part of it. And we've done a lot of work with establishing protected areas for land and protected species legislation overseas. We do a lot of stuff like training rangers and things like that too. This was where we started. If you go out to the Statue of Liberty Ferry and you go to Castle, is it William? Clinton. Castle Clinton used to have this in it, which was the original New York Aquarium back in 1892 and on. It was a Stanford white architectural design with all these big old arches and stuff, really cool building. And Robert Moses, back in the 1950s when he was trying to rearrange the city, he decided that Coney Island was too trashy. There were too many poor people out there. And so he wanted to bring some class to Coney Island. And one of his schemes for bringing class and getting rid of the poor people was to move the aquarium out to Coney Island. It also helped because he wanted to, I think, build a Battery Bridge tunnel or whatever it was down there. So there was a lot of argument over that, and he lost some of his battles, but one of the battles he won is that New York Aquarium eventually got moved out to Coney Island. Happily, it's still welcoming to people, all different demographic stripes, but we do have Robert Moses to thank for our oceanfront location on the beach out there. Eric, what do you do?
I'm a lead diver on one of the Sunday teams. Probably the thing we do the most is clean the exhibits, but we also help a lot of the trainers and things like that to monitor animal health. We monitor exhibit health. We can do a dive that's as short as 20 minutes, as long as 3 hours, as warm as 79 degrees, as cold as 50 degrees. We're in all different types of exhibits, doing all kinds of things. A lot of people think, oh, you're just in there swimming with the animals, but you're working, you're helping. You're doing a lot of things that keep the aquarium running.
What's your day look like?
I get there myself at about 7:15, 7:30. We have our first debrief at like 8 o'clock in the morning, but before the debrief, we do chores. There are certain chores that we have to do before the dive day starts. There are rinse tubs that have to be filled so that we can rinse our gear. There's certain gear that has to be, with COVID protocols, has to be pre-rinsed, pre-cleaned. We contact the keepers and trainers and ask them, hey, we're diving, let's say, Sea Cliffs today. What do you want us to do there? We're diving Ocean Wonders or something like that. What do you want us to do there? So we do all this, and then at 8 o'clock, we actually give a briefing. We go through our COVID protocols, and we plan the dive day. And then the divers, after that, they get kitted up. We do things. We get the first aid kit ready. There's a whole list of things that we have to bring to every dive site. And then we do whatever the selected chore is for those dives.
Beautiful. And then after the dives, we do a bunch of cleanup stuff again, and then we do a debrief. It's the basic shape of it. When are you usually out of there by?
It varies. If we do Ocean Wonders, we could be out by 2. If we have a limited dive day, you could be out by 12:30. But usually we plan to be there until about 5 o'clock because you never know what comes up. Sometimes keepers will say, hey, can you spare a diver or two to dive this exhibit or that exhibit afterwards? So we're really flexible. We're ready to go like whenever because you're underwater. It's like amazing.
Ashley and Megan, do you have anything to add?
I mean, we get to dive with a harbor seal now.
That's pretty cute.
I was gonna say the 50 degrees, the seals make the 50-degree dive worth it. As a self-proclaimed fair weather diver.
Fully worth it or almost worth it?
I mean. I will diverge from the people, yes, are amazing, and it's a great community that I find myself in now, and I'm very proud to be in it, but also, I'm going to diverge and say, yes, the animals do make it worth it.
Animals are pretty awesome.
I also learned a lot more about how to be a good diver at the aquarium. I was pretty new when I first started, and now I dive full face mask, and we learn a lot of skills that you don't necessarily learn when you're doing one dive trip a year. So I get to feel good about being a diver.
But not any more full face masks because we can't figure out.
I
how to
know,
clean
miss
them for COVID.
it.
That was Megan in the last picture, by the way.
I think you also become really good at buoyancy. If you can hold buoyancy in 12 feet of water, people, oh, it's only 12 feet. You're holding 12 feet in water. You're usually overweighted because you want to scrub. You don't want to go to the surface. You're task loaded. You have, you're looking at your buddy. You're looking at your air. You're scrubbing this. You're scrubbing that. You have specific things you have to do. It really makes you a better diver.
Yeah.
I feel like this is, I was talking to you about this beforehand, but I feel like this is an area that we're still figuring out how to do better. But one of the goals, the main goal of the aquarium being out there is not just to show animals, but to actually educate people about conservation and about the state of wild spaces and figure out how we as citizens of an 8 million person city can be a little bit better at the impact that we have on the world. In terms of direct education with the public, we're pretty limited right now. We have traditionally done full face mask presentations on a big Shark Tank in tandem with our education department out front. Those have not been going on during COVID because we don't want things like this happening. I think probably we'll start them up again pretty soon, which means that we have to figure out how to sanitize the inside of the full face masks. We'll get there. And then we have a more informal goal of doing walkabouts and trying to interact with people when you're coming back in your dive gear. Because we're diving all over the park and you often end up walking back in dive gear through a bunch of people. And kids, when they see the divers, light up. The kids like the animals, but they also like the idea that there's a thing that they can interact with. And we're a little more interactive traditionally than a lot of the animals that live at the aquarium. So I do want to kind of keep developing the opportunities that we have to really interact with the public and help bring our education mission to life as opposed to just people having this passive involvement with the animals there. We also learn a lot ourselves. This is folks a couple of years ago talking to the sea lion trainers about the work that they do. So we get a bunch of interaction with people that work with the animals directly. For me, at least, coming to this particular job in my early 40s, I think one of my childhood fantasies was to work at a zoo or aquarium or something like that. And I couldn't even figure out how that would work as something that you get as a job. So getting to come and work here and actually see how this all works is really neat. And I think for a lot of volunteers, and correct me if I'm wrong, I think part of the joy of it has been being part of that working community that cares so much about these animals and learns what goes into keeping them safe and healthy and all that other stuff. We also, in addition to the animal education, we, as per OSHA regulations, qualify all of our dives in scientific diving. And there's a pretty large front-loaded training obligation in that. So we do a full scientific diving class, which is finally organized and we're finally taking the final exam, first round of folks. We also do pretty good CPR education. We do DAN, diving first aid for professional divers. If you're divers and haven't taken that class, be it with us or someone else, I heard there's some good instructors at Pan Aqua. You should really take that course. I've taken all the first aids out there, and the Dan stuff is just the best. The videos are the best. The test isn't the best, but the videos are the best. And it's really most suited to what we're doing as divers. So there's a lot of opportunities to learn. And then we get to go diving. And I think for most folks, this is the big selling point, is that every 2 weeks you get to go diving year round. And during the summer, if you go on a vacation or whatever, maybe that's not quite as special, but getting to go in some tropical tanks in the winter is a pretty special opportunity. Getting to go in some cold water tanks in the winter is its own kind of opportunity. But it is, for folks that are going diving, really neat. And it's both, I think, pretty cool for people that are new to diving and really want to get comfortable with their equipment. I still remember that stage of going every year on one vacation and trying to remember which button on the VCD did which. And I'm over that now. But if I'd had this going every 2 weeks and putting my gear together, that transition would have been a lot faster. And similarly, for those of us that love diving and have been doing a bunch of it, we're already sort of strung out on it. And this opportunity to get to go diving regularly, I think is pretty great. And for Shane and I, the fact that when we're having a bad week at work, we can be like, I'm going to put myself on the schedule and go dive with the sharks. I think that's a pretty great perk. One of the best job perks I've had. But then there's this.
It gets ugly.
You want to tell them about a couple weeks ago? I don't
We
think
have,
anybody was here for that.
I don't think so.
Well,
It's-
worst case scenario when you were here, just to be clear.
A worst case scenario we had in the sea lions that Joe mentioned that partake in the shows have
So cute.
what we was that?
So cute.
They are, and they live in the Aqua Theater, and they live in an area in the back as well. But they have a behavior pool, and the behavior pool has been.
The brain broke.
And there was, all I know is they got the pipe in, or the vacuum hose in about 3 feet, and it still kept coming, just poop, backed up for 3 feet. And the pump that we used to take it out stopped every minute and a half. So it was literally emptying it, dumping it in a bag, repriming the pump. Somebody would go back. The divers had it probably the easiest because they weren't the ones literally in it. But that's about as ugly as it gets. And that's about as ugly as it's ever gotten. But
So
it's,
if that sounds kind of funny to you, this might be awesome. If that sounds terrible,
Like
there's
vacuuming
some of
poop
that.
is therapeutic. I mean,
I remember,
yeah,
I think vacuuming poop is therapeutic. Vacuuming compacted poop.
even more therapeutic.
Borderline.
I remember one of my first, I volunteered there for maybe 4 years before I started working there. And early on, I remember being in the Aqua Theater, and it was cold. It was stupid cold. And the water, the visibility wasn't great. And I worked a crappy job at Ruby Tuesday. And any chance I got, I didn't work. And I'd go down and dive. And I ended up in Aqua Theater one morning in the brutal cold, looking at this piece of poop, thinking, I would really rather not be anywhere else than right here. You know, people are going to work on the trains, and I'm freezing my ass off looking at poop. But it was much better than any of the options that I had, which is maybe says a lot about me, but it was still.
So just understand, it is a chance to go diving, but it is also a chance to go diving in the cold. This was, I think, happening during a snowstorm. We are year round, and part of the volunteer obligation, which I'll talk about a little more in a minute, is that you come all year, for at least a year, and hopefully for many, many, many years. Because the more years you stay, the less we have to train you, and the more we can actually put you to work and rely on you. So it's not all upsides. A lot of it's pretty upside, but sometimes a little other way. There's a great community. I think we've already all kind of been talking about that a little bit, but it's really nice people, and I feel like the unifying factor is everybody's kind of weird, in a good way. Like it's a group of eccentric divers. It's not your sort of like.
Why are you looking at me?
What are you trying to say?
You didn't want to participate. Stop participating.
That doesn't make me weird though.
I feel like it's a beautiful group of eccentrics from all different walks of life, and that this is this place where, like, one of the things I love about it is that we kind of all come to this place that we love, and so we all kind of get to see each other at our very best, and I think that's a really special way to kind of get to know people. And as I mentioned, it's a big commitment. We do ask for 26 shifts a year, so that is a big chunk out of your life, which I understand it's sort of hard to be like, oh yeah, sure, no problem, I'll do that. So we do, when we actually onboard volunteers, you have several chances to back out along the way. But once you actually sign up and we start training you, the ask is for 26 shifts a year minimum. If you want to come in and do extra shifts, that's great. But 26 shifts a year. It's every 2 weeks. It is on paper 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. Usually ends up being more like 8 a.m. to 2 p.m. So it's not quite as much as it looks like. And then if you go on vacation and miss some shifts or something, the expectation is you come in on other days and make those up. We do some evening shifts during the summer. There are currently teams on Saturday, Sunday, Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. Saturday and Sunday are big teams. If you really want to be on a weekend team, we probably want you. If you want to be on a Monday, Wednesday, Friday team, we love you. We want you so much. So if anybody works freelance and has weekday availability and wants to go diving, weekend, yeah, all right, we need you, especially weekdays. What else am I forgetting about the commitment?
I think that's it.
There's some other stuff too. You got to buy DAN insurance.
You gotta make Dan insurance.
If you want to use
You
your
have
own
to have
regulator,
physical.
you got to get serviced. You got to get
Dive
physical. Yeah.
Rescue?
We're supposed to get rescue diver, yeah. So if you don't have rescue diver, we traditionally have let people on the team, but the expectation is that you get it pretty soon. And it's a good class too. If you haven't taken it, it's fun. You learn a lot.
I kind of missed the, what did you do it 7 days a week, or is it just
We do Saturday, Sunday, Monday, Wednesday, Friday.
Monday, Wednesday, Friday?
Yeah. So it is 5 out of 7.
Right.
If you really want to come in on a Tuesday,
We'll find.
figure it out. But then
We got
another
some
5
poop
days.
just for you.
You're always giving.
We'll save you a special turn. We just finished onboarding a cohort. Our next formal orientation, which will be like this, but scarier and in more detail, will be in early spring, probably late February, early March.
You'll let me know and I send out a blast email.
I'd like that. Thank you, Dave. In the meantime, if you want to go to NYAquarium.com, I probably cut off the M when I was putting the PowerPoint together, but there should be an M over there. They got more information on it, and that's my email. You're also welcome to just write me and get put on our email list. I think there's also some sheets back there that if you're interested, like if you're like, yeah, I want to know when this orientation is, please put your name and your email and what days you're available on that. And I'll add you to the list for the next time that we're setting up that orientation. So we would do that orientation, which will probably be online. And then we'd schedule a day of training and checkout dives where you'd come in and take a couple of the scientific diver classes and we get a chance to know you a little better. And then in the afternoon, you'd go for a dive and we'd make sure that your buoyancy isn't too screwy. We're okay with some rough divers, but it can't be like too rough because you are working in pretty confined conditions. And so we need people that have gotten past this stage of diving. You can still kind of be in this stage, but the full sculling is probably once you get a few more dives in before you come and join us. I think we got a couple of videos at the end. Oh no, not yet. So things are almost back to normal. This is this Halloween. The Friday team. Can you go back one?
Oh, I thought Eric was Chewbacca.
So this was, I think this was surface support, and then they actually got to go diving again. And for me, this Friday team is really into Halloween, and they in fact did it on the 22nd, which is totally not Halloween. But the level of commitment they had to it. Whereas Eric's team, which actually was in on Halloween, I was the only one that missed out.
It was Nosferatu. I was like, it was amazing. That was awesome.
I was amazing. You guys were a tremendous disappointment.
I was dressed as a diver.
It was terrible. So this is finally, we're actually getting back to sort of almost having normal fun again. And then they were diving in their costumes, and it was beautiful. There's one more picture before we go on. Oh, 2 more. And this year, we've finally been getting around to doing a little bit of diving off the beach. It's kind of neat that we are at Coney Island, and there's an ocean right there, but we've mostly been neglecting it so far. So one of my personal goals, both because I think it's nice for volunteers and because it's fun for me and fun for Shane, is to start having more actual ocean diving as part of the volunteer program. We got to get the tanks clean, but it'd also be nice to have a scientific program that actually did local underwater research and built a better year-round species inventory. Because believe it or not, there's not actually a book about underwater life in New York. There's been some pamphlets. There's a NewJerseyScuba.net is a good edit.
The OP just released one this year.
Damn it!
We do need
Bite your tongue. Ours is going to be better.
it will.
Or maybe we could collaborate on making yours better.
It needs a little.
New York has this amazing underwater thing that if you've been diving locally, you kind of know, but most of us only dive during the summer, where our animals come up seasonally as the water gets warmer during the summer. Gulf Stream actually brings Gulf Stream orphans up here and end up with butterfly fish. And then everything goes back down again during the winter. And we've got this amazing weird flux of animals. It doesn't happen in coral reef environments the same way. It doesn't happen in the Caribbean, where we've got these animals that are showing up in huge numbers, basically when the water temperature hits certain little ticky numbers. And none of that is really mapped out very specifically. And it's a neat opportunity, I think, to fill in some of those gaps and help connect us in an urban environment to the environment that's actually around us that is not as bad as we think it is. So I would love to actually do more with that and get people diving more and get more data and get more pictures of stuff so that we could help in tandem with BOP fill in some of those gaps in public knowledge. And then this is a beautiful thing. This was Memorial Day. It's not a bad thing. It's a positive thing. This was Memorial Day, and that's Ariana. She's one of our sea lions. And she's one of like the less friendly of our sea lions. She's from Columbus Zoo. She's actually just a guest sea lion with us. And usually when the sea lions give birth, we coerce them into the back where they go and give birth and back. But Ariana didn't want to go in back. And so Memorial Day, we opened at 10. Right about 9 in the morning, she moved under the rock at the front of the exhibit and went into labor. And right about 11:30 on Memorial Day, she gave birth to a sea lion pup at the very front of the exhibit, and there was blood everywhere. It was just spectacular. And there were like kids crying, tears shielding their eyes. And a couple of us were out there explaining that it was actually just a miracle of nature, beautiful and positive. But it was so cool. I was so happy that people actually got to see this. And then around 12:30, she bit off the placenta and started throwing it up in the air and taking bites out of it. And just got better and better. And that's hopefully what I actually think of when I think of the pandemic. It's just this beautiful moment of that. Shane, do you want to tell us about this dive?
What is that?
This is one of the videos.
If you click on
this-
the picture, I think there's a plus.
I should set it up with what we were doing.
Yeah.
We were working with one of the groups, one of the research groups with WCS, the Ocean Giants program, and they had a grant to put out recording devices to gather data on whales that are coming into the harbor. And Joe and I would go out and we would dive and set basically the recorders underwater. 99%, I would say, of the diving was in complete blackout diving in muck and just. But one day, Joe and I would go back and forth. He would do a dive, I would do a dive, and I think I got the pleasure of diving in the Narrows, Arizona Narrows. And Joe's next dive was probably this one. And I was on the surface supply, so we could talk back and forth. And I hear like, "Oh my God, there's a shark!" And I'm like, "That is messing with me. There's not a shark. We've never seen a shark when we dove." And then all of these started coming. I ended up going back. Joe came out, and I ended up going back into the water and just filming them. And there were how many? A couple of
Thousands.
But
It's probably 2 dozen.
I remember going in. This is just off Rockaway Beach. And I remember going in thinking it's like, jumping off a boat, you've got everything, you're all set to do the dive, navigate, et cetera, et cetera. And that's when I realized that I was tethered to the boat and I didn't have to do anything but float there and just watch them. And I had pretty much a full tank. I didn't stay under that long, but it was, I don't know, maybe 15 minutes. It was pretty spectacular to see them.
And if you've been diving in New York, I think you probably know from near shore diving, visibility is really bad. These animals are out there all the time.
Yeah.
There's such a special treat, and it always happens in late October when the visibility opens up and you get to see this moment of like, oh my God, there's those animals that have been there the whole time, but we've never freaking seen them because they're just out beyond us.
When we did that last dive,
And-
the visibility was like 25, 30
That's
feet.
that sweet
Yeah.
October spot that we all got to
Yeah.
learn more about. This is one of those also trips. We were just doing the whale buoy retrievals. We weren't doing the actual installation, so we weren't diving. This is me, and just for background, I worked at New York Harbor School with Joe Jimenez and some other
What
folks
did I
for
do
quite a while
there?
before this, and I feel like we spent years trying to be positive about seeing like a spider crab. So this was the first time. Go back one. This was the first time that I was actually seeing charismatic megafauna in New York City. And it was really like deeply emotional after all those years of dragging people through the muck. To actually see, this is right off of Staten Island. So this is like almost city limits if it wasn't in the water. And what you see on the surface is that there's big schools of mossy bunker that are kind of disturbing the surface of the water and coming around. And there's humpback whales that more and more are in residence during the summer, feeding on what is becoming a real rejuvenation of the New York marine ecosystem. And so I feel like part of our obligation at the aquarium over the coming years is to help connect better that visitor experience to what's actually going on in the water, which is pretty cool. I think it's probably always been pretty cool. We just didn't know that much about it, but the whales were gone for a while and they're starting to come back. which actually goes back to Richard Nixon and the Clean Water Act. There's some beautiful things coming out of the 70s that 5 decades later we're starting to actually see results from. And you can see Mindy here, who's the scientist, the PI on this project. She's pointing out the mossy bunker, and they usually start freaking out like that when something's coming to eat them. And that's in New York City. And then we'll end, if you'll click forward, with one more video. And this is from a few weeks ago. We did a bunch of diving in May off Coney Island Beach. And then we did a couple dives in October. Eric, you were out for this one, right?
Yes.
And as I said, October, we're losing Dutch Springs mostly. So I think all of us locally need to learn more about local ocean diving. October has this sweet spot. Like the water is in the upper 60s at the beginning of the month. And then about halfway through the month, depending on weather, the water temperature plummets from about 68 to about 63. And all the phytoplankton gets shot down in the water. But it's still pretty comfortable for diving. And you still got a bunch of the Gulf Stream animals in there. And there's this moment, it might not be more than like a week or so, but there's this moment where the water clarity is really good. And the water temperature is still okay for diving. And we happen to just nail that.
That was
And
a spectacular
It's the best shore dive that I've had in New York. And we also have the advantage at the aquarium that right off of our shore is the debris field left from the historic Dreamland Pier. So one of the old piers, amusement piers at Coney Island, it's still there. It burned down in 1908, and they basically just cut off the iron pilings just above the sand. And so there's this pretty extensive debris field out there that after about 20 dives we found that has stony coral growing on it and redbeard sponge, and it's got little butterfly fish living in it. And we can just watch for a few minutes as we kind of swim around in this debris field during this remarkable moment of visibility for New York. How many folks dive locally?
Whoa.
It's worth a try. I know it's not, part of the downside is that it's not always good, but when it's good, it's really special. That's a feather bunny. You can see the little horns coming out there, the shell. It's an adorable little fish. It's not very well focused. Sorry about that. And it's living inside a channeled whelk shell. They actually have these big, almost kind of conch-sized shells that live out there. That's a black sea bass, and again, you can see the old Dreamland pilings that have been cut off there. That's a hermit, a horseshoe crab that's dug down into the sand, and it's kind of toilet seat sized. It's a big one. And there's these spot fin butterflies all over the place in October in New York waters that drift up here with the Gulf Stream. One thing that in future years I think we're going to focus on is actually collecting some of them because they are not going to make it through the winter here. So there's a bunch of tropical species that if we can make more organized collection plans for them can actually come live in the aquarium and help educate local folks about what's going on in the water and also keep the animals from getting killed when it gets too cold out there for them. They're adorable.
And the species list of what we saw is long.
It's getting there.
Yeah.
I'm curious to see what happens. We got some permits for this winter, which maybe we'll wimp out on if the weather's really terrible. But if we do, look at there's actually fish up there you can see. It's incredible, remarkable. But I'm curious what we see in the middle of winter. I think it's going to be a very different species.
No lionfish yet?
I have yet to see one. I've heard anecdotal tales of one.
What did you see on the last one? Towards the end of you and
Oh,
Seth.
it's on here.
Oh, it is?
It's a surprise.
Who did this video?
Seth.
Seth?
Just kind of following the lionfish around. I don't know what that was.
Umbrella screw.
Yep.
Beach umbrella screw.
Is that what it is?
Oh, really?
That's me. I have pretty good buoyancy. It also helps that I'm holding onto the back. You just kind of hang on there. As we're sort of watching through the rest of this video, does anybody have questions?
In the habitats area, and how large are they?
Depth or volume?
Both. I mean, this room.
A lot of the exhibits are 11 foot deep max, 12 foot. Our deepest is 24 feet. And it ranges, this would be a bigger exhibit for us. We've also got a lot of smaller ones, some medium ones. I got a big giant shark tank. That's a northern sea robin, which is a pretty close relative of the flying gurnard, for folks that know the tropical species. And it's so cool that we've got this amazing fish with the little semi-prehensile pectoral spines crawling around on the bottom of our water. It's really common. That's a tiny little window pane flounder. Other questions?
You use your gear or bring our own?
We mostly provide gear. We have to have proof of service for anything life support. So we provide VCDs. During the pandemic, we've been letting people bring in their own regulators if they want to. You got to bring your own fins, mask, and booties. Thank you. Everything else, in theory, we provide. Some stuff you can bring if you want to. If you do want to bring your regulator, you got to get it serviced every year, which is.
So you provide appropriate environmental suits.
You don't have to wear any of it.
What kind of wetsuit, dry suit are you wearing?
We pretty much exclusively use 7mm Hendersons.
Okay.
We have a handful of dry suits. I can't promise they're going to be in working order forever.
Uh-huh.
And we have hoods, we have gloves, we have stuff like that. I am a big proponent of wetsuits. Like we don't go below 50 degrees generally for our diving. I'm a big proponent of dealing with that in wetsuits. Other folks seem to prefer dry suits anywhere below 65.
I got Glovers at 70-something degrees. I'm in the dry suit. No, I got a tuxedo underneath.
I have dove with 13 millimeters on my core at the aquarium before.
Yeah, and I'm gonna try to order some vests this year. I feel like it's
Most of
probably
the water temperatures there
It's
are
like the same marshmallow man from Ghostbusters.
pretty constant. So like, for the most part, the temperatures of the water are controlled. So in some instances, it's outside temperatures that you're dealing with.
But it's also, the water temperature's not bad, but a dive can be 2 hours, 2.5 hours if you're really good, Vanessa. Yeah, so, a 7 mil will keep you warm. But if you're scrubbing and working, you're good. If you're using the vacuum, usually what we do is whoever has the dry suit, they do the vacuum because you're not moving that much. That's why I love the vacuum.
I think this is an old toilet or sink.
There
from the
was.
old pier, which is pretty cool to see.
I'm just curious, you said that you were worried about the tropical fish that they migrate up and then they get trapped here? What happens?
They get washed up by the Gulf Stream
And then they,
and get dumped here, basically, like they have a larval form, and so
then
they
just can't get out.
they can't get back. It's not very good video of it, but this is the coolest thing I've ever seen out here. Seth and I were coming back in from this dive, and this is right off of Coney Island Beach in about 10 feet of water. And we start seeing these shadows, which you can sort of see back there a little bit. And they get a little clearer. And there's a school of 40 squid sitting there. That's all I got.
So you mentioned all the cleaning and you mentioned the poop. And is there any risks of people getting sick with the algae or ingesting any of that? How does that work?
We do water
prevention
quality.
of that?
We do the same water testing that they do off of the beach. We test for enterococcus to establish fecal coliforms and figure out whether there's the risk of stuff like E.